So, so my intent is to get a kind of a summary record of a period of time in which there was an intense interaction between Americans and Russians, historically unique, and as far as we can tell, not likely to be repeated on this scale in the near future. Mm-hmm. And that engagement really began with citizen diplomacy. And the sort of people-to-people exchanges, and later, as the Soviet Union began to open up and then dissolve, you know, one of the characteristics of Russians is that they like to do things with people they know. They do not trust strangers. They don't sort of put ads in the newspaper or put out tenders and expect really to do things. So a number of people like Jim who were involved with citizen diplomacy were kind of called upon by Russians to say, can you help us as we make this transition and become integrated into the world? And so that's how the two periods kind of merge in my view, in my observation of it. And I guess the other side of that is that given how bad relations are now, it seems to me worth thinking back about that period of citizen diplomacy and what can be learned from it in terms of relations going forward. But that's somewhat outside the book, but I'm not sure yet. It might be part of the end part of the book. So, you know, clearly the citizen diplomacy is more about politics in a way. For me, in terms of the book, politics are the context in which people interact. And I'm less interested, not that I'm uninterested, but the framework of the politics only tells us what's possible for people on their own initiative, what kinds of things they can be involved in. So that's how I put the two together. And I didn't think that I could actually accurately describe the impact of Americans on Russia in the 90s without starting with citizen diplomacy. I just didn't think it would be possible. You know, and I don't know, when I looked at the Wikipedia entry for you, it said that you were the creator of this space bridge.
Co-creator. Does it say creator or co-creator?
I believe it says creator. Let me just take a quick look.
Well, yes, that's conceptually true, although it should really, maybe I have to see if I can change that, because Joseph Golden he and I had the same idea at essentially the same time.
Oh, okay. It says you were the American creator.
Oh, okay, there you go.
Yeah, so that's probably accurate, right?
That is accurate.
Okay.
A creator in the terms of conceptualizing something, in the same
right.
Joseph did. There was differences, but essentially it was the same idea that he had, strangely. I didn't know him at the time.
Right. Well, so how did you come to this idea? What was your role within the kind of set of people here?
There's other names we can talk about later, but okay. So what happened was simple. You want me to just start telling you what happened?
Yeah. Just tell me your story. Yeah.
How it first. I met Kim. I was a TV producer, like young, new, done a documentary that won some awards, and I was a news editor at the time I think it was for CBS News at that time, local in San Francisco for the Bureau.
Okay.
When I met Kim, and we met because I made a documentary about wind energy, and he had stuff to do with energy at the time too.
Wow, that was prescient. That was way before. Yeah. Okay.
The first sentence of the documentary was, the year 2000 is only 20 years away.
Great.
Right. Anyway, so that's why we started to talk. But then he was producing at that moment this program about, he was like a kind of satellite. He was sort of the brilliant guy who understood satellites, that and PBS thought he was wonderful because he was using their satellites to do these TV shows. And so he was producing a program of connecting Americans around the country on Thanksgiving Day. So it's like if you didn't watch football, there was something else you could watch, which was Americans celebrating Thanksgiving across the country, live, connected to each other. But it was all through the central location. And he hired me to produce a San Francisco, the San Francisco link to all of that.
Right.
Art Buchwald, you know who he is?
Yeah.
Okay, so he was the host. He was in the studio in Washington, and he could see these monitors, and the idea was that he would say, okay, thank you for asking that question, Boston. San Francisco, what do you think? Like that.
Yeah, yeah.
There was different groups. So my group was a group of young people who were separated, you know, who had been taken away from their families for child abuse or whatever, and were in a kind of group home in San Francisco. There was a motorcycle gang in Boston, a military family so it was sharecroppers. It was like,
yeah,
good idea, a wonderful idea. Anyway, so once it got going, what happened was, so everybody at their Thanksgiving table had a little TV set, right? So they could see what the other people were saying.
Right.
What started to happen is that they would just answer each other and just completely ignore poor Art Buchwald sitting in the studio going, well, why? Nobody was even listening to him. I'm like, well, what do you think of this? And
yeah,
I want to make a toast, you know, and it was really interesting because wasn't expected.
Right.
So, okay, then Kim and I fell in love, and the next thing you know, we were together, and he got a grant from a PBS show about Russia. It was about nuclear war.
Okay.
Nuclear war. In fact, it's really important because it was about how. So I worked on that. So we co-produced. He produced it. I directed it and wrote it. Anyway, it was a pretty good documentary about how many different Americans dealing with nuclear war. So it was a family and, you know, whatever. A guy who worked at Livermore Labs on the neutron bomb, an old lady peace activist, you know, one of the Ban the Bomb people from the 60s. So again, it was this diverse group of people. And every day, a friend of ours named John Steiner would call up and say, but wait a minute, what about the Russians? What about the Russians? What about the Russians? Every day. It was like, well, I don't know. We don't have the money. We can't do the Russians. You know, we don't have the money. We can't go to Russia. Nobody could go to Russia anyway.
Yeah.
But that got me thinking, you know, somehow the two things came together in my head, which was, you know, this thing of connecting people and having them suddenly talk to each other.
Right.
And not need a mediator, a moderator in between. And what about the Russians? And I thought, well, wait a minute. What if the Americans could talk to the Russians? He knows how to do satellites. Maybe we should do that. So we started talking about it. We wrote this big proposal called the Second Kitchen Debate for PBS. And it's a really great, it should happen now, which is, you know, Russians at breakfast, Russian family at breakfast, an American family at dinner. Right. And they have a meal together and talk about their life. And this continued into the future. But anyway, we made this big proposal and everything, sent it in there, and they turned it down immediately and said, this is ping pong propaganda. That's what
so this was a reference to ping pong diplomacy?
I think it must have been.
It must have been. Yeah, because that's what opened China was the Detroit auto workers went and played ping pong in
Exactly.
China
Yes,
and
it did
opened
reference
China.
China,
Right.
but why they came up with it, I don't know. But
Wow.
anyway,
Yeah.
so we sort of were very disappointed, but what are you going to do? You know, it is what it is. Finished the documentary about nuclear war. We were very involved in both of us. You know, there was a group of people who were deeply engaged in the issue of nuclear war.
Okay. So it wasn't just a job thing. It was a personal commitment,
We were
sense of
both.
values.
I mean, one reason we got together was we were both kind of activist TV people. So, you know, it was a very interesting. We actually did some really interesting stuff around nuclear war.
Uh-huh.
That documentary I thought was quite good. Um, but in the meanwhile, I don't quite know how it happened, but Kim heard about this guy, Jim Hickman, who was
Uh-huh.
interested or was going to Russia or had gone and was going to go back. And I said, "Oh, he works at Esalen." They said, "Oh," we said, "Let's go to." I'd never been there. Neither of us. No, I might have. No, I hadn't, and neither had he. So we drive all the way down there, and we end up. I am not kidding. Sitting in the hot baths with this guy, Jim Hickman, telling him this whole story about that we did this, and we realized we could connect the two together, and PBS turned us down, and he's like, that's really okay. And we have a nice talk. He goes away. I don't know, like 3 or 4 months later, he calls out of the blue and says, "We're doing it. we're doing it." He had gone, to Steve Wozniak. I mean, I didn't know. I don't remember anything about all of that.
Right.
I don't know if it came up subsequently. Anyway, the next thing you know, he calls, and I didn't go, but Kim just got in the car and drove down there to, about this first space bridge in Southern California.
Yeah. I know from the podcast and also from what Jim wrote about it, but it's still actually a bit fuzzy as to how successful it was.
Yeah.
So we'll get to that. But yeah.
If you want me, I can just keep going.
Well, please keep going. Yeah.
You should know one thing. Write this down. If you go to youtube.com/spacebridges, Kim put up a whole bunch of them, all of the space bridges. They're literally unedited. There's little montages about the different space bridges and all that we use for promos and everything. Things like that. But then there's the whole space bridges, and that the second one really is up there, which is really the crucial one.
Okay. The second one.
Well, it's the only one. The first one, it doesn't exist on. It's the first one that's up there. It's called Linking Us Together.
Okay.
That is from the second US Festival. Okay, so Steve Wozniak was doing this US Festival, and Jim talked him into connecting, right?
Yeah.
And I wasn't there, but this is, as I understand it from many sources, they really didn't know what they were doing. And it was all like, whoa, suddenly there's the Russians in this TV studio, right? Acting like, yay, let's party.
Right.
It was like 6 a.m. or something.
Right.
They had a bunch of young people going, yay, let's rock and roll. And meanwhile, Bill Graham, do you know who that is?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Of course. I'm 72 years old. So yeah, this is all.
So what knows where people were, but so Bill Graham he was doing the whole music venue,
right?
US Festival, which included like big name bands and all the, it was a big deal, huge audience, giant, and above the stage was this giant screen.
Yeah.
Usually, the close up of the lead singer, whatever. But so the idea was to put the Russians up on the screen in between the acts.
Right.
I believe that's what they wanted to do. So Bill Graham, who is Hungarian, decided that it's a fake and that there is no way the Russians are letting a video feed come from Russia into the US. There's no way they would really do it. And it's a fake. And I will not put it up there on the screen.
Whoa.
He did it first. At first, he put up these I think these ladies with handkerchiefs singing, Russian folk songs. I think that got up there before he figured it out. I mean, it wasn't probable. I mean, who would believe this actually happened? I mean, none of us understood. So that was just like, what a bust. It didn't work. Too bad. What a great idea.
Right.
But then I think Jim and came back, and then he convinced Wozniak to do it. Wozniak decided to have it again. Okay, let's see. It was in the spring, and he decided to do the whole US Festival again in the fall of
Right.
it would have been the spring of '82, the fall of '83, and then it was like, okay, we know we're going to do it. The Russians are willing to do it again. They had to lie.
So from their point of view, it all went through and everything was shown to an American audience, but that's not what happened. Yeah. Okay.
But thank God they did, which is pretty great.
Yeah.
Anyway, so now everybody's ready to do it again, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we didn't know, just as an aside, of the dire straits that the Soviet economy was in, and that, Gorbachev was one of these guys called the men of the 60s. I don't know if you've ever heard this phrase.
No.
There was these young men who were coming up into the leadership of the Soviet leadership, and they understood. Evgeny Velikov was one.
Right.
Gorby was one. There were some others, and they understood that there was no gold in the bank, zero.
Yeah.
They were totally broke, and no one knew this was a big secret, but they knew they had to open up. There was no choice. So, that's how it kind of happened. Oh, right. Also Andropov was one of them too.
Right.
And Joseph Golden, somehow, no one's ever quite figured out how, was part of this whole, he knew them all. I mean, it was very weird. Very, very strange.
Yeah, and he seems like a very mysterious character. Very mysterious character.
And, our Russian producers, they hated his. It's like, get that guy out of the studio. He was impossible to deal with. I mean, he was absolutely impossible. And he was just, because he was so committed. I mean, he would walk up to you and go, my job is to save the world. And he would not stop.
Yeah.
It's quite a visionary. Really, in that Russian, that tradition of kind of crazed Russian visionaries.
Yes, right. I've met some of them. Yeah.
You see why I'd like to make a movie out of this. I'd like to have Joel and Joseph in this movie.
Right. Yeah.
Joel, he was something too. He still is, but he was really quite a character as well.
Yeah.
So anyway, let's think what happened then. Okay, so the second one, though, by now, we said, okay, we're going to make this right now.
Yeah.
And they had the money. I mean, they did it. I don't know how much Jim had to do with it, or it was Wozniak. There was a director who subsequently did many of the Spacebridges, directing them on TV terms was really tricky.
Right.
I think two live things going on they weren't in sync though. Right?
Yeah, I took part in a space bridge at that time, shortly after, and I remember the lag time made it. You were constantly talking over each other because of the lag time.
Yeah, no, it was very tricky.
Yeah,
and that part was hard. And then there was a guy named Peter Gerwig. You must have. Yeah.
I need to talk to Peter. I met him maybe once or twice in Moscow in the '90s, so I need an introduction to him is what I need.
I think he produced the first Space Bridge. The second one, sorry.
The second one.
Yeah, nobody produced the first one. It was just like awesome. But by the second US Festival, I think they hired Peter to produce it. I didn't meet him then till later, but I believe he did.
Was Peter in Moscow?
No, he was in the US. He was
He was in California.
Yeah, on the California side. And Jim and the other guy whose name I forgot went back to Russia. And
not Garrison?
No. I'll think of his name. I think
not the astronaut, Rusty.
No, this was a guy. I think he funded it, actually. He was like a Marin rich kid kind of person. I can't quite remember his name. I'll think of it.
Okay.
Nice guy, actually. Haven't seen much of him since then. But anyway, they went to Russia again. You'll see him in the video. And it has on it too. And now they built a tent on the grounds of the US Festival. And I didn't have anything to do with who was, but so the moderator was Sam Keane, the famous writer of a book called Faces of the Enemy,
Okay.
which was about how Russians and how people demonize each other. Rusty was in it, astronaut and cosmonaut, right?
Yeah.
Two scientists, or I think they were called bureaucrats, being George Brown, whose district it was, a congressman. District Santa, what was it called? Santa Clara? I can't remember what the San Bernardino, is that it?
Okay. Yeah.
So he was the congressman from there, and Velikov was supposedly the bureaucrat, his match, right?
Right.
He's really a scientist.
Scientist. Yeah.
And then a teacher and a teacher. Yeah, a teacher and a teacher.
Right.
Bureaucrat and a bureaucrat, an astronaut and a cosmonaut, and a host on each side. One was Sam Keane, and one was this guy, Vladimir Posner.
Right.
Showed up and spoke perfect English. We were like, "What? Where did he come from?"
Yeah. You didn't expect that.
No, and in fact, I think he stopped. I think they took him off that for a while, and then he went back on later. But
right, and there was no music as part of this.
Oh yeah, no, there was music.
There
It was completely different. Instead of using the big screen, the big stages,
right?
This tent was where it happened.
Yeah.
And in the beginning, I think in the morning was the link between the two sides talking, and in the evening there was two kind of jazz quartets, one in the U.S. and one in Russia, that played together.
Okay.
There was I'm trying to, the musician was a kind of, a guy who sang, an American kind of singer-songwriter type. I can't remember his name. And the Russians had this, it was called Aquarium, I think.
Aquarium. Yeah, they very famous early rock and roll group.
Jazz, right? Jazz.
Well, a little bit. They were. I had a record of theirs. I don't know what happened to it, but it's Beatles. They copied the Beatles.
Okay, I'm not sure if it was that. And if they had copied the Beatles, they probably wouldn't have let them play that anyway. So what they played was kind of jazz, and I'm not sure it was them. I think it was. I mean, that's a different story from later about the Beatles, but we'll leave that for the time being.
All right.
So, okay. So we all, I'm working. We have this trailer. It was like 100 degrees in the trailer, and just working. And I went to participate when the thing actually was happening.
Yeah.
I stopped working, and I went and sat in the audience. And I tell you, it changed my life. That experience.
Really.
Well, I mean, you know what it was like, the evil empire and all that. It was the height of the evil empire, and nobody had talked to each other for how many years?
Yeah. Right.
And suddenly, there they are, and there we are. I mean, the cosmonaut and the astronaut were brilliant because taking you up into the bigger picture and rolling video of space and all that. And Rusty was really quite he has his memoir, very interesting too. He was way out there in his mind compared to others. And they knew each other already, the cosmonaut and the astronaut. And but the thing that blew everybody away was Velikov, who was supposed to be a bureaucrat, and and he sat there and he said something like, "We want to be sure that there will never be a nuclear war." And Americans didn't know that the Russians didn't want to have nuclear war.
Right.
To believe, but everybody in the whole place just was in shock. And then people started crying, and I mean, literally, people were crying and reaching out, and it was just tremendously moving that there was this connection, that we felt the same way, and we were all a bunch of activists anyway, right?
Right.
It really, really was amazing.
Yeah.
And so I think that really changed everything in a way. That was the start of the whole thing. And so it was a big success.
Yeah.
At night, the groups played together and people danced. It was all in this tent, though. No, not in the big thing.
Right.
Um, but it really worked this time.
Yeah. How many people were in that tent, do you think?
In the tent, you can see there's about, I'm not good at numbers, 50 to 75 maybe.
Uh-huh. Yeah. So these were mostly peace activists and people who.
Also citizen diplomats, yeah, and also tech, who knows who had the war.
Right. All right. Right.
It's the whole point of the US Festival had to do with high tech, and this was Steve Wozniak. And
Right. Yeah.
kind of people there too. You'll see the whole. So it made this documentary, which is what I believe is up there. This hour-long documentary.
Okay.
I'm not sure if the whole thing. I'm not sure if it's the whole Space Bridge or just the documentary. But so I edited the doc. We made this big documentary. Oh no, I apologize. The ping pong diplomacy was not when they turned down the proposal. It was when we sent them that first Space Bridge. And they turned that down, and they called that ping pong diplomacy.
Really?
Can you imagine? And not only that, but we finally got it on the air. I can't. It's a little muddy how it finally got on the air, but once it did, the New York Times, the TV review guy from the New York Times at the time was a conservative. It was the Reagan era, right?
Right. Yep.
And he lambasted this thing like, how dare you allow Russians to speak to Americans? That they're parroting the propaganda of their own country.
Right.
Might have been a later one, actually, that this happened, but not long after.
Right.
And he called it execrable. So I've always been very proud to have worked on this execrable TV program.
Right. Right.
I mean, really, isn't that weird? It's all so strange.
Well, yes and no. There's certainly a continuity.
Uh-huh.
It's just, there's continuity between the past and the present. It's
right.
A lot of things haven't changed.
Do the second kitchen debate now. That's what somebody should do now. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, I'm not sure what else. Then the next thing you know, the UC San Diego wanted to do a thing about the anniversary of the war.
Right.
And I didn't. That had a whole. So I didn't work on that, but Kim did.
Okay.
And then Kim became the guy to, be the producer of Spacebridges. That if anybody was going to do anything, come to him. He was the one that did them.
Right. And were they broader than just Russia, or was the Space Bridge was focused on U.S.-Russia dialogue?
Soviet American dialogue.
Soviet American. Okay, yeah, you're right. Not Russia.
Then there was the one from San Diego, which was veterans of both wars. It was the 45th anniversary, I think.
Okay.
The end of the World War II.
Yeah.
And then they did another one too. The San Diego people did another one of kids reading books to each other. I don't even remember.
Right. That was in the podcast, and then there was one from Minneapolis called Peace Child.
Yeah. No. Then after that, I've told people this before. I'll tell it to you. Some famous quotation goes, "Every great idea starts as heresy and ends as orthodoxy." There is. You can look it up.
That's good.
It's a good one. And that's exactly what happened.
Yeah.
So, starting at the execrable, right, which was really the most fun. The best ones, Peacetown was fantastic. So I produced it in Minneapolis, and Kim was in Moscow.
Okay.
And it was a British guy, an enthusiastic peace activist who had gone to Russia with a group of kids, actors, singers, something, teenagers, and had these two groups meet in Moscow, and they did a play together that he wrote called Peace Child. It was really corny. But then he came back and he managed to raise the money to do it as a TV thing. And the TV people agreed, to air it live. It wasn't live. Was it live? I can't remember. John Denver showed up. I don't know how he got there. It could have been Jim, who turned out to
Yeah, I think Jim talks about taking Don Denver to Russia, and I don't know if that was before or after this.
I don't know either, but he
Yeah,
showed up, and
yeah,
he song actually, it's in the video, and there's a short version of that up on the Spacebridge site
yeah,
about, right? It wasn't children love their children. It was like, it's about time we talk about peace, something like that.
right,
That
right.
was moving. And so that one was this play, and it was really fun because at the
Why in Minneapolis?
time,
Why Minneapolis?
I think that's where the kids were from that what's his name had brought over, the British guy
The British guy. So,
who his name was, I see his face in front of me. I don't know. Names disappear after so long. Anyway, it'll be in there too. He had brought this group over from Minneapolis to Moscow to do this play.
so anyway, that's the Minneapolis connection, and there is a Minneapolis Russian American Business and Cultural Society that still exists.
It was a TV. I can't remember which TV station. I think it says it. I think it's WCCO, maybe.
Okay.
Kind of liberal. TV stations were rich then.
Yeah.
They were ambitious, and they did agree to do it.
Yeah.
And really, it was wonderful because we got to mess around with getting people to sing together with the time lag.
Yeah.
One interesting thing. And we also did a little scene from the play where they held hands. This was the big highlight. And
Right.
it got news coverage across the whole US.
Wow.
So
Wow.
it was the first breakthrough.
Yeah. Yeah.
Who wouldn't cover that?
Right.
Reaching out beyond the divide, and two kids holding hands and
Through space and all this.
Yeah.
So you and Kim became like the team to do this space bridge.
We did. From that, I think that's the one I worked on after, because I didn't work on the ones from the two in between. And I think that might have been the fourth or fifth, depending on how you call it. And then from then on, there was a whole sequence of doing this until I had twins. And then it was a wild time. And the amazing thing was going back and forth to Russia, where the difference between, we tried so hard to get these things on TV, right?
Right.
It was really hard. In fact, it was probably the UC one that got called execrable, maybe, because it would have been the first one that actually, because it was a university, so PBS probably took it, that one. And from that on, they took them all. And they'd come up, and people would want to do this or that. And, it was very interesting, like, to come up with a sort of, also the concept, like, if you could do this in person, don't do it on TV. That was one of the things we learned.
Huh. Okay.
The Russians started doing them with Bulgaria, right?
With Bulgaria.
Yeah. It was like, why do that?
Yeah. Right.
Communism is good. Yes, communism is good.
Yeah. Right. Right.
So it was like, you have to do something that makes it worthwhile to do it, right? It's expensive. It costs like $300,000 in those dollars to do one of these things.
Right. That's
2 satellite bounces. It was really complicated.
Yeah.
And anyway, the Russians were into it. Our two producers were great, but like I say, we had no idea. We never knew if they would do it or not, right?
Right.
And they almost always did. Now we know why, but at the time we didn't know. We didn't even know why they would do this, let alone whether they do any given one.
Right.
And a really important one, I think the one that was the most important, most people would say, was nuclear winter.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so Carl Sagan and a few other eminent scientists had published this paper that the nuclear war would cause a nuclear winter, right? And that was terrible, and so then one thing led to another, and the next thing we're going to do a space bridge with scientists on both sides. So then it was going to be on CNN. CNN, I believe, is the one who ran it.
Wow.
which was, so it was a big, it was a leap. These were always like, they go along and then they leap, right, into a new, not just more people seeing it, but more important subjects, right,
Right.
as we go along. So suddenly this was really important. And a lot of people will, I mean, Kim will tell you this, but you know, there was a lot of tension.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
I mean, an experience I'll never forget, I was going to say, was getting off the plane in Moscow with just boxes full of tapes, videotapes, you know, these
Yeah.
cassettes that are kind of like this big, like pretty
Yeah.
big. And I guess somebody, Kim must have already done that. And he said, just say telemost when you, to customs. Or maybe it was Joel who said, I don't know. Anyway,
Yeah.
got off, telemost, they go, oh, and he's like, okay.
Right through.
It was, I mean, you know, can you imagine? And
Yeah.
so a lot of, I don't remember which trip that was, but I did produce one of them. But maybe I only really went and did one because I felt more comfortable back in the U.S. You know,
Uh-huh.
I think it was just somebody was like getting worried, or I don't know what.
Right.
But
Right.
this one this one was very complicated. It kept jumping. It was this Jim Garrison.
Yeah.
I think this was his one. It was about, God, it was some kind of scientific, what was it? It wasn't climate change. It was, maybe it must have had something to do with the nuclear. I don't even remember the subject. To tell you the truth, I mean, I was on the Russian side and it was
Right.
all, everything I could do and it was so it kept jumping time zones across Russia to different, you know, it was like the chief scientists of Krasnoyarsk and then,
Right.
you know, in Siberia and what was going on in the United States, I don't even know, except it was really hard to control. And, you know, you get a scientist on there, right? And he's given like 20 minutes to talk. No way. He's
Yeah.
already
Yeah.
that would fucking say he's gonna talk as long as he wants.
Right.
And so I'm going, we gotta cut him, you know, turning to their producer. He goes, no, you cannot stop a Russian scientist from speaking. It was really a nightmare, really.
Yeah.
But I think the show came out all right because it got edited. These never aired live on our side.
Never live. Never. Yeah.
Not yet.
Yeah.
Russians aired them live.
Right.
I don't know if they did it at first. I'm not quite sure at what point they went live. Oh no, yeah, no, I know they didn't air them live either. They were always edited and then aired. But we were like on the front page of Pravda. You know, the Spacebridges were like, Kim. I think somewhere Kim has all this, you know, Xeroxes of this news coverage, which
Right.
was hardly a mention except the execrable in the U.S. press, and then the Peace Child little videos. Maybe come up now and again, you know. But in Russia, it was front page news every time one of these.
Right. Right.
Huge. I was on the bus with Pavel, and you know, he goes, "Oh, they're talking about the space race," you know, like just tremendous. And what a difference! That's what was weird.
Yeah.
In the supposed free country where this was like still verboten, and then in Russia where it was like just a sensation. It was very
strange. Yeah. Yeah.
By now, Posner was back. I don't even think he worked on that one that I went there for. Anyway, he did most from then on, or from something he did them all. And okay, then what? So I can't remember because at a certain point I had twins and I got like kind of couldn't, I think that would have been 87.
Okay.
Close to the end anyway. Wait a minute. In fact, that was really close to the end anyway, wasn't it? Yeah. Okay, so this all went on throughout the 80s.
Right.
Then it was, I know. Right about then was a Donahue.
Yeah. Okay.
Right, and I didn't work on those. I did a little bit, but just on the side.
Yeah.
And so that was the whole series, and that now jumped into another level, right?
Right. Yes.
Everybody knew who Phil Donahue was, and suddenly he was linking Russian and American,
Right.
housewives, talking to
Right.
them, and that was a big deal.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So it went up to that, and so it kept going up,
Right.
and finally, our my former partner, David Hoffman, who you might want to talk to, because he probably knows a lot, not about this era, but the next phase of dealing with Russia. We were partners, and he went and talked. Okay, so George Brown, who had been a congressman, right,
Right.
doing the first space bridge, like David is a very smart, creative, slick guy. So he immediately, he went to George Brown and and I'm Internews, our company, and next thing you know, he's got all these congressmen all whipped up about doing a space bridge. And sure enough, he did put together between the U.S. Congress and the Supreme Soviet. This was on the far side of Phil Donahue. So by now it had gone, the execrable stuff was long past, and it was now
Right.
happening, it was Phil Donahue.
Right.
And so with that, he could go to them and talk them into it. And of course, the Supreme Soviet, they wanted to. By then I was like, I think that's when I was having my kids. I think I worked on that stuff a little, but not very much.
Right.
David really produced it. And so sure enough, on ABC News, a huge special series, which was like 3 or 4 of these.
Huh.
And and they were, so again, we went from, that what I said in the beginning,
Right.
to orthodoxy. And these were by far the most boring space bridges that ever took. They kept getting more boring as you went along,
But
right?
more acceptable.
And now it was really boring. I mean, you had congressmen saying, and who was that anchor for ABC who died from cancer? What's his name? Peter Jennings.
Peter Jennings. Yeah.
He hosted them. And, I mean, the big thing would be, you're going to let Jews go. Oh, this is news. That was like, ooh, a big deal. They announced they're going to let Jews go. That's
Right. Right.
But really, nothing interesting. Pontificating on both sides.
Right. Right.
But the big thing was, let's see, was that? I think the Donahue ones were the first ones that were live. They were live.
Well, in the podcast, they talk about it being edited.
The Donahue?
Yeah.
I can't quite remember. So I think they were aired live in the US on Donahue, but the Russians were still editing them. I think that's
Okay.
what it was. But then ABC News said, it's live on both sides. We're not doing it.
Okay.
We agreed. So suddenly this was live. The
Right.
in the US Congress won 2 Emmys. It's a huge, big deal.
Wow.
Because, and it was, so that was the whole scope.
And who produced those? Was that taken over by ABC, or did your crew do that?
No, our company Internews always was involved, between either me, David, Kim, all the 3 of us were Internews. So, but yes, ABC News produced it, but then they hired Kim after that. then when that was over, so I had just had the kids. We were living in San Francisco, and they hired Kim to come work on this TV, doing live stuff, because he's really good at it.
Yeah.
So anyway, we moved to New York. I mean, it was wild. And then I really should just tell you that there was a whole other phase of dealing with Russia, which I think really will matter.
Yeah.
You already know about this, because David and I started an office of Internews in New York, which was it was a good thing the way it turned out. It's a great place to be,
Right.
And we kept up with thinking about Russia this whole time. And David and I, although he went off to like grow pot in Mendocino County, I think at that point.
Okay.
So I was doing whatever. Kim was working for ABC. I was doing, just real briefly, the way it came about was a friend of mine who's German living in New York he went back to Germany as the Berlin Wall was falling down. and he started a pirate radio station in Leipzig, East Germany. Now, that was the heart of the Berlin Wall falling, right?
Right.
And he figured out that you could take those old VHS machines,
Yeah.
you could actually, there's an RF output at the back of it, and you put a little antenna on it and a transmitter, and you could transmit a signal out, and it went to like a city block.
Yeah.
And if people could figure out, they could pick up this signal, right?
Yeah.
The video of, of the revolution coming from the main center of it.
Wow.
Wow, this is amazing. I actually, then and there, I called the Whole Earth Review, which was this magazine. It was actually called the Coevolution Quarterly at the time. You remember that?
Yeah. Yeah. I remember it. Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
said, I want to go to Germany and write a story about this. And they go, okay, we'll pay your ticket. That was the good old days.
Yeah.
So I did. I went
Yeah.
there and wrote this whole story about what had happened. And I was fascinated with all this. And anyway, just to go quickly, I started to discover that there was this thing was happening all over Eastern Europe. And then Kim was, as part of his ABC job, he was going to Moscow with Diane Sawyer to interview Shevardnadze.
Oh, wow.
So this was early 90s. When would this be? 90?
Yeah. It'd have to be 90.
It would be like 90. Let's
Yeah.
say.
Because, and then Georgia became independent shortly thereafter, and he
So
went down there later.
the government, so it would have been 90, 91.
Yeah.
And, I said, look, while you're there, see if you can find any independent TV stuff going on. Because I'm finding it all over Eastern Europe. And he goes, okay. And he comes back, and there's like 3,000 tiny TV stations all over Russia.
Wow.
Because
Doing the same with the same technology?
essentially, well, it depends. The technology turns out to be the easy part if you are inclined. I mean, I got a grant from USAID to go all over Eastern Europe and find all these and write a little. We made a book. What do you call it? Like a how-to.
Yeah.
How to build your own pirate radio and TV stations.
Wow.
Which got translated, distributed all over. But they were doing it in Russia, because the minute a government falls apart, somebody is going to. The regulations disappear, and somebody's going to start trying to broadcast.
Right. Right.
That could be true today. In
Right.
the United States government, I could be broadcasting to my neighborhood here. And that's exactly what happened everywhere. People would do it like this way with the little UHF. Then it turned out in Russia, they had, all those big, endless apartment building complexes with
Right.
12 giant buildings. Well, all of them would be wired together with one big antenna on the roof of one of them, picking up channel 1, right?
Right.
Because what else was there? So these people, they would literally go up and disconnect. All the buildings were wired.
Right.
Just disconnect and plug in like a VHS machine and play tapes that they would go out and make.
Wow.
The entire and then they go and they in the basement, invariably there would be like, in the basements would be a little TV studio, right? Where they would do the news of free the neighborhood of Russia, whatever it was, and they go out and interview people, and then they go around and knock on the door and collect money. Well, also there was porn, right?
Huh.
Because it was like, wow, we could do anything, so they would put porn on there too, which of course always made it popular.
Yeah. Right. So
it was wild.
yeah. So it was kind of the spirit of the times. It was like, a porn and free political speech.
Mm-hmm, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
And, this was happening everywhere, all over the region, as well as then it turned out all over the Soviet Union too. So at the time, I couldn't deal with the Soviet Union because I got hired by by George Soros, to go around and give these people money all over Eastern Europe that were starting these little radio and TV stations. Boy, was that fun.
Wow. Yeah.
hard job because, it was a slog, and then you end up in, Romania where it's a fucking mess.
Yeah.
But it was very rewarding to support.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then we ended up helping them write the laws for free media in these countries, some of which have survived.
Uh-huh. Huh.
But the same thing was happening in Russia. So David got all excited about this, and he and I went and wrote a big, big report proposal about what was happening in Russia. And our friend and funder, Wade Green, bless his heart, he's gone. He decided he wanted to fund Russian TV, or his person who gave him money. And we were just right. Kim and I met him at some point and said, we just figured this, look, we found these 3,000 TV stations in Russia. And he goes, oh, good. We want to fund that. I was like, okay.
Yeah.
So I was busy doing Eastern Europe. So then David took all that, and we wrote this proposal, but then he went out and started to raise some money somehow or another. I can't even remember because I wasn't.
This wasn't USAID money. It was.
Yet. No.
It was?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay.
No, calling me though. They were calling and going, "Oh, it's so interesting what you're doing." I go, "Go away. We don't want anything to do with you." Spirit of the times, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, eventually, but it was inevitable, wasn't it? So anyway, David and I started to go to Russia and spend, and there was things happening there. This was like phase 2 of citizen diplomacy, right?
Right. So phase 2. You're watching the emergence of free media in 92 after the collapse of the Soviet Union.
I would say, yeah. I think I started. It was like 91. I think is when it started. When I started to do that with Soros, I think I was for a couple of years there. And meanwhile, David was developing the thing in Russia, and then I was going to Russia with him because I could travel. Anyway, it was too much to travel with twins. I mean, I didn't bring them, but live in New York,
right,
and travel back and forth to Eastern Europe, and it was just crazy. And so Kim quit his job; he hated it anyway, and we moved to Paris.
Huh.
It was 91.
I see.
It's just like so then I could jump back and forth real easily. And
right.
We had a close friend, and they ended up doing a whole TV show based on the Spacebridges. These are really personal Spacebridges. Interestingly, so they used, that's up there on the site too. They used they're called vis-a-vis. And so they used video conferencing equipment, which was new, and it took things the size of a refrigerator.
Right. I remember that. Yeah.
Smaller. It was a lot cheaper in Egypt than doing satellites.
Right.
I mean, there were satellites, but it was a little dish, right? By then.
Yeah.
They started to do these between the parts of Yugoslavia that were at war, different parts of the world, people talking to each other. It was a nice series. Yes. And meanwhile, I'm traveling back and forth Eastern Europe. We have these twins, and we made it work somehow. You can do almost anything if you. Anyway, so finally, we're back to Russia. I'm not quite sure. I was working parallel with Soros had somebody else in Russia, so we were all working parallel. And then David popped up, and I introduced him to George, and of course, then George got all excited about David. He was that kind of person. And I'm not sure, at a certain point, one thing essentially it was Ukraine. I was working with the foundation in Ukraine, and then they wanted to make a media center, which was a bad idea, but David talked George into doing a media center.
Huh.
It gave Internews the money, and then David went to the USAID, and they said, "Oh, this woman fell in love." He got the woman running the thing to fall in love with him. He told me once, here's what he did. He would have a little bag from Victoria's Secrets, right?
Yeah.
And the New York Times stuck in it. And he'd carry this bag into his meetings with women. Anyway, no, you should talk to him. Anyway, so
Yeah.
she says, well, we have $7 million. We're running it. It's the end of the year. We don't know what to do with it. This media center sounds like a great idea. The next thing you know, this huge amount of money, Internews, we've never seen anything like that, never. And by then, it's like we have to decide if we're going to live in Europe or where we're going to live because our kids are going to school age now.
Right.
And what are we going to do? So we decided to come back to California, stick with Internews, come back. And David goes, good, great, because we got lots of money. And then, like we're all getting paid really for the first time, probably in all our lives, that we actually got regular paychecks.
Right. Right.
And that launched that. And but we were always a nonprofit, and that became more and more difficult with the AID, with the U.S. government in general. The accounting systems were totally different. They had tons of more money than any foundations did, and they were wanted. They kept saying, "Why are you still a nonprofit? Why don't you become a contractor?" And we wouldn't.
Yeah.
To our credit. But eventually, they do stuff like, then the next thing you know, okay, then there's Manana. David found this amazing woman in Moscow. And he traded an Apple computer for Manana. It was a beautiful. No, because she was working for this, a guy that started the Glasnost Foundation. Well, no, was that what it was called? His name was Semenov.
Yeah.
Alexei Semenov. You know him?
No, but that name sounds vaguely familiar. But
old guys with a beard, always smoking stinky cigarettes all the time.
Right.
A kind of human rights activist. And Manana was working with him. And so David trades him a computer for Manana. And she was unbelievable. Really, the greatest thing we ever did was get Manana. And so we started an office in Moscow.
Right.
Really, this whole report that we wrote, David raised a little bit of money. And the next thing you know, we're finding, all these TV stations. And then Manana starts a consortium of independent TV. There's a woman named Liz Haase. Is that name ring? Probably not. She's a lawyer. She's actually a very interesting person. Where she lives in Berkeley, I think, and she put together a conference of these. How she found them, I'm not sure. Maybe she met Manana. I think she was driving all over Russia. I actually had worked with her in Eastern Europe, and so suddenly in Nizhny Novgorod,
right,
there was this conference the first conference of independent Russian media.
What year was that? Do you know?
It was probably 91 or 92.
Yeah, probably 92, I bet.
So Wade Green.
Boris Nemtsov was the governor, and Nizhny was Nemtsov and was the governor, and Nizhny was like the hotbed of reform in that period.
I would, yes, maybe that's why it was there. Liz, she put it together. It was, and I went with Wade Green.
What was her name again? Liz what?
Haase, Hasse. I can give
you Hasse.
You should definitely talk to her.
Yeah.
So I went with Wade. Guy named Monroe Price was there. You ever heard of him?
Nope.
Interesting guy. He's an academic though. He was at Yale. I don't know if he was there at the time, but he actually did a lot of legal stuff with Russia later, based out of London. But I can't quite remember. Anyway, all these really interesting people, and all these young, like 20-year-old guys who had started their own little TV and radio stations. They were all there. And it was a very exciting. And there and then, Wade said, "Well, really, what we should do is train these. We should train these journalists." And I said, "Yeah, we should." And that was the start of what Internews is today. It was basically Wade said, "Okay, I'll get the money."
Huh.
And, we started to set up training for journalists all across Russia.
Huh.
And it was really great. It really was. We had journalists coming to teach them how to be journalists, and the whole, okay, to make a long story short, all of that blossomed. Manana became the head of the council, or what would you call it, the commission that gave licenses to stations. So she had
Wow.
super powerful, right?
Wow.
No, I know it's a big deal.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Putin came in during this period.
So,
And
so you're talking about the whole period of the 90s, because Putin didn't come in until 2000.
so right about 2000 was maybe the peak of this work in Russia.
Yeah.
It was going fine in Eastern Europe, and in Russia it was even better because all these stations we were producing, there were producers in Russia that were doing whole series of programs that we could broadcast across this whole network, right?
Uh-huh.
We
Yeah.
were a network of independent media, TV
Right.
stations. And then Kiev, they built a big satellite dish on their media center in Kiev. It was always a problem, but that's a different story. And anyway, so it got to this huge peak, and Manana was like super powerful person, and she would fly back and forth to Europe because by now Internews had an office in Europe. David like was a big expansionist. Let's
Right.
more offices, and so there's offices in Paris and all over the place, and we have meetings in Europe, and then Manana would come and meet with and bring money back in. We used to have a line item called bribes, but we had to take it. Yeah, we had to take it off the budget.
Would you replace that with gifts? Yeah.
Right. You just
Yeah.
replace the great thing about the U.S. government is that if you're 5 or 10% over or under, they don't care.
Yeah.
10% over, they'll just give you the money.
Yeah. Yeah.
Unbelievable. Anyway, so at one finally, maybe it was 2001 or two, I'm not sure, but Manano, she'd done this a million times. So she's coming back in and she declares she has $10,000.
Right.
She actually had 10,000 euros.
Uh-huh.
So they pull her over and they go, well, 10,000 euros is more than $10,000. So you're illegal. You're smuggling money into Russia.
Right.
And whether they put her in jail, I'm not sure, but they went to the office and confiscated all the computers.
Wow.
Then they told Manana, you can go to jail or you can leave the country.
So she left the country.
She vanished and had to live in Paris for I don't know how many years.
Yeah.
And she was miserable. You know how Russians are.
Yes. Right.
So,
Right. So she.
And they proceeded to dismantle the entire network. And then not only they made it illegal, first of all, for any foreign money. Personally, I understand like U.S. government money running media in Russia. It was always a little, that's one reason I'm glad we were not a contractor, because they'd start coming to us going, oh, there's going to be an election in Romania. Could you help us promote the good guy?
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
So it was always.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, to make a long story short, they dismantled everything. Every one of those stations either shut or was compromised.
Wow.
They agreed to turn it into basically to follow the party line,
Yeah.
or they shut them.
Yeah.
And there's not, I don't, with the exception of, Echo of Moscow radio station, there's hardly an independent media anywhere in the country now.
Well, what Dozh, the TV station, Dozh, the Rain, yeah,
Well,
and
where is it? Moscow only?
no, I think it's national, but it might be an internet station actually.
Okay, I think on the internet it's possible.
Yeah, on the internet there's a pretty free exchange, but they're tightening that as well. But
they will tighten it.
Yeah.
My impression these days in Russia is you can say anything as long as you don't broadcast it. People can criticize the government left and right.
Yeah.
You can't do anything about it. So it's better than the old days, but.
Oh yeah. And,
so
and certainly through the internet, there's still access to lots and lots of information, but
not in it anymore.
yeah, I mean,
move back eventually and she quietly lives in Moscow, and she advises art groups and stuff.
Oh, okay.
And people
So
come
she must have gotten a signal that it was okay to move back.
eventually, but it was like 4 years later. I mean,
Yeah.
they wouldn't let her back in. She couldn't go back. It was a terrible thing.
Yeah.
The whole thing is terrible. It was really sad to see the whole thing dismantled and turned to dust.
Yeah. Yeah.
After it had been, just incredible. In Eastern Europe, it's better. I mean, not in Hungary, of course, and certain places, but other places, it really did stick.
What about Poland? Is it problems in Poland too?
I'm not sure anymore.
Okay. Yeah.
Because they now have one of those righty guys running it, right? In Poland.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah. They've had for a while. Yeah.
it's the template is you stop those guys from broadcasting, right?
Yeah.
So
Right.
you regain control over it. So I don't know.
Yeah. So Internews was so when you were doing this training, was it USAID money or was it Soros money or where was the money?
All of it.
Yeah.
Always, truthfully, there was always more money from the U.S. government than anyone else.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, as a nonprofit independent, they really could not make us do anything.
Right.
They stopped giving us money.
Yeah.
And they were pretty good about it. They tried to convince us to, do propaganda. Not really, but to, elections. We refused to cover elections. I mean, we did. I think we trained some journalists in covering elections.
Right. Right.
But we ourselves would not get involved in any of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the trainers were always scrupulously, really, real good journalists, not shit propaganda.
And where would the training take place? Inside Russia, or would people come to California?
They came sometimes, but it was inside Russia. And the great majority of it, was.
Yeah.
And I don't know. David would know, but I also know some of the trainers pretty well.
Yeah.
That direct you to one of our guys, who's now he was one of the trainers. He also he organized the trainers for quite a while, and I could put you onto him. He's a writer now.
Okay.
Smart guy. He speaks fluent Russian too. That's how he got working for us. But wait, there was one other. One great thing was this. I think we did squeeze Russians into this, which was I arranged with CNN. They were doing training for their international. They had this little training thing going on of journalists,
right,
in Atlanta, and I somehow arranged that Soros was involved in that too, to get Eastern Europeans to come over and be part of that. But we had some Russians come too, even though technically I don't think they were supposed to, but nobody cared.
Yeah. Yeah.
We were able to send people through this little course at CNN too, which I think was good.
Yeah. Yeah. Very interesting. Very interesting. So this sort of citizen diplomacy morphed into kind of independent journalism.
It's more like who we were.
Yeah.
Other people doing citizen diplomacy morphed into whatever else, like Joel morphed into, a millionaire businessman.
Right.
And other people morphed into other things, right? It was just what we did.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I'm trying to think of these other people.
It's interesting. And no, I think of the kind of institutions of the peace movement at that time, the anti-nuclear movement, and you weren't formally connected to any of these organizations. You were.
Well, we were media people, so they were in our programming.
Right, right. So you got sort of content and information and so on from these organizations.
Yeah, if we did TV programs or anything, we'd interview people and they'd show shows. No, I personally wasn't. I think Kim was always more of an activist than I was. I was more like on the journalism side.
Right, right.
But yeah, I'm trying to think. There was something about. Well, it was the same with Russian. I even, there's the movements, and then there's media.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
Yeah, so
yeah. But you were kind of in the middle of that, it seems like. I mean,
I mean, as time goes on, I'm less and less. I'm more and more convinced that activist media is a huge mistake.
is a what?
It's not. It's a mistake.
Yeah,
Activist media, partly because we see where that has led.
right. Yeah,
Trouble with
yeah.
getting old, right, is you see where everything leads.
That's the problem, isn't it? Um, so so when you were what say in 1990 when you were starting to discover all this independent media, why what did you think things would look like in say the next 10 years, that there would be a sort of growing independent media network, or what were you thinking?
I personally was never convinced that the network was that, connecting them. Well, there'd be some programs that would be distributed out to the network, and there was satellite issues that I wasn't much involved with. But I thought because we were able to get involved in writing the laws in Eastern Europe, and when I say we, it was local, really brainy media, legal types,
Right.
would get all involved. And Manana was doing the same thing. They were writing laws. Local, Russians were writing these new laws. They all got rescinded, but in Eastern Europe, I didn't, I didn't know. We didn't know. Never thought it would disappear the way it has. I mean,
Yeah.
really completely disappeared. But
Right.
some of the guys who were at that very first meeting that Liz put together are multimillionaires now, and they kept their stations, and they didn't really. From the beginning, the news was always sort of a side thing for them.
Right.
They did news because you're supposed to do it, but really they were interested in
Entertainment.
Getting foreign TV shows on their stations, and then producing their own programs,
Right.
stuff. And there was a lot of that. And why wouldn't there be?
Sure.
There was kind of inherent tension between these were always commercial TV in Russia, especially. And there was always an inherent thing because we were more like PBS types, right? All of
Right.
them.
Right.
So there was always that.
Yeah. So did you, I know, and I don't know the details, but I know Peter Gurley got involved with Storytime, and which was a media company there in Russia.
Yeah, no, he went off on the commercial media route.
Right.
I don't really know what happened, except I know that's what happened, and that he's probably a guy you should talk to, right?
Yeah. Right. Right. But he wasn't involved with your network at all.
I don't think so. Although Anya brought him up when I told her I was talking to you, so she had something to do with him. I also remember him calling me when I was working for Soros, pitching for money.
Yeah.
Irritated me at the time.
Yeah.
But I don't. It's possible that I just didn't have much to do. I never had very much to do with him. I've met him a couple times. That was all.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know.
Okay. Well, and so did you were there, while you were doing your independent media, Russia was being formed at the same time.
NTV.
MTV, as in the music TV.
That was started before that, right?
No, MTV Russia.
Oh, MTV Russia. No idea. Never.
Okay. All right. That's really my question. My understanding was that the people who put that network together went around and bought local stations and put together a network of local stations, which they branded as MTV Russia.
Yes, that's probably true. And I don't know, but David and this guy, Paul Greenberg, they would know about these things, because there was a certain point at which I left Internews. Like, I ended up, let me see, I think it was 97. Yeah, that I ended up, I just there was so much government money, and it was so distorting of what we were
Yeah.
doing that at a certain point I thought I had to choose, what I wanted to do, and so I basically left and started my own little Internews Interactive, it's called. So my whole life is one company, but
Oh, okay.
it's really not anything to do with the old Internews, although it's not
So,
antagonistic. or anything.
so is Internews still?
Oh yeah,
It's still.
Internews.org. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
huge, and they're not in Russia at all. They're,
Okay.
but they took this formula and went all over the world. So Burma, you name the country where,
Right.
and also, David was quite a good businessman, even though he's a nonprofit. And they expanded it into many, many, there's an internet thing, and, they still get just 99% of their money, I think, comes from, they did a climate, they do any subject. There's actually a group of climate journalists that are affiliated with Internews.
Uh-huh.
They've been able to do, and some of it's really impressive work in
Right.
places like Burma, what used to be called Burma, what I mean, Myanmar.
That's what my story is about the American involvement. And, look, I mean, this is a story, very few Americans are obsessed with Russian interference in American life. They have no idea how involved we were in Russian life. And I don't mean this as an expose, I mean it as a statement of fact and a historical record that this relationship is much more complex than it is portrayed.